Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the fading light of the early Australian goldfields, where the day's dust still clings to your boots and the last rays of sun stretch long across a patchwork of canvas tents and shallow diggings. You can almost feel the dry earth underfoot, hear the distant clink of metal tools being set aside, and smell the faint promise of something warm brewing over a fire. It's the kind of place where fortunes are chased all day and quietly reconsidered by night. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. Not because anything dramatic happens, but because life out here in the 1850s gold rush is so relentlessly uncomfortable that your modern self might politely request a refund within the first hour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let Inapos ease into tonight Inapos journey together. You arrive just as the goldfields begin their slow exhale. The digging has stopped, not because the work is finished, but because the light has given up. Around you, miners stretch stiff backs and roll their shoulders like men who've spent the entire day arguing with the earth and lost most of those arguments. The ground is pockmarked with shallow holes, some hopeful, many abandoned, each one a small story of optimism and disappointment. A mainstream historical fact: during the Australian gold rush, particularly in places like Ballarat and Bendigo, thousands of miners, known as diggers, would work claims often no larger than a few square meters. It was crowded, competitive, and strangely democratic. Anyone could try their luck. Almost everyone did. You shuffle toward a small cluster of tents, your boots kicking up soft dust. They're not really tents in the modern sense. More like improvised shelters made of canvas, timber scraps, and stubborn optimism. Some lean at questionable angles, as if reconsidering their life choices. One flap lifts slightly in the breeze, revealing a man inside already half asleep, hat tipped over his eyes, boots still on. Efficiency or exhaustion, you're not entirely sure. Nearby, a lantern flickers to life. It's a small thing, really. A glass case, a weak flame. But as dusk settles, that lantern becomes the center of the world. People gather around it instinctively, like moths who also happen to complain about back pain. The glow spills onto rough hands, worn faces, and the occasional hopeful grin. You notice how quiet it becomes. Not silent, never silent, but softer. The clanging and shouting of the day melt into murmurs, low laughter, and the gentle crackle of firewood. Someone coughs, someone sighs, someone mutters something about tomorrow being the day, which, judging by tone alone, has been said roughly every day for weeks. There's a billycan hanging over a small fire now. If you've never encountered one, it's essentially a metal tin used for boiling water, usually blackened by countless fires and questionable cleaning habits. It's about to become the evening's main event: tea. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many miners brewed tea by tossing loose leaves directly into boiling water and then letting them settle, or, more dramatically, by swinging the billy can in a wide arc to settle the leaves at the bottom. Yes, there is a non-zero chance of accidentally launching boiling tea into the wilderness. Consider it both beverage preparation and light exercise. You edge closer, drawn by the warmth and the promise of something vaguely comforting. A man nods at you, offering space by the fire. No formal introductions. Out here, your presence is explanation enough. You sit. The ground is harder than you expected. It's the kind of hardness that politely informs your spine that comfort is a distant memory. You shift slightly. It doesn't help. Welcome to the goldfields. Luxury seating has not yet been invented. Someone hands you a tin mug. It's dented, slightly warm, and probably older than it looks. You hold it anyway because it feels like belonging. The tea is poured, strong, possibly aggressive. Tastes like it has opinions about your life choices. But it's warm, and after a day like yours now, it might as well be the finest drink in the world. Around you, conversations begin to form and dissolve in slow, lazy currents. A man to your left describes a promising patch he's been working. He gestures vaguely, as if the gold might hear him and decide to hide. Another listens, nodding in a way that suggests polite skepticism. There's an unspoken rule here. Everyone hopes, but no one fully believes anyone else's luck. Historians still argue whether the sense of camaraderie on the goldfields outweighed the competition. Some accounts paint a picture of cooperation and shared hardship. Others describe tension, secrecy, and quiet rivalries. Sitting here, you get the feeling it's both. Humans, after all, are wonderfully consistent in their contradictions. The fire pops suddenly, sending a brief shower of sparks upward. For a moment, everyone watches them rise and disappear into the darkening sky. It's oddly mesmerizing, like tiny, ambitious stars that immediately give up. You pull your coat a little tighter. The temperature drops quickly once the sun is gone. Australia might be famous for heat, but the nights, especially inland, can be surprisingly cold. No one told your fingers, which are now reconsidering their career in gripping objects. A man across from you begins humming softly. It's not a full song, just a fragment. Something from home, maybe. It lingers in the air, unfinished but comforting. You glance around again. Lanterns now dot the camp like scattered constellations. Each one marks a small circle of life. People eating, talking, resting. Beyond them, darkness stretches wide and patient. The bush waits quietly, filled with sounds you can't quite identify but are fairly sure you'd rather not investigate. There's a strange peace here. Not the kind that comes from safety or certainty, but the kind that comes from shared exhaustion. Everyone has done what they can for the day. The earth has given or withheld. There's nothing left to do but sit, sip, and exist for a while. And as you cradle that dented mug of tea, feeling the warmth seep slowly into your hands, you realize something. This moment, lantern glow, soft voices, the gentle rhythm of a camp settling down, is as much a part of goldfield life as the digging itself. Maybe even more so, because gold is never guaranteed. But evenings like this, they come quietly and faithfully, at the end of every long day. You stay by the fire a little longer, letting the warmth settle into your hands as the last traces of daylight finally slip away. Around you, the camp shifts into its evening rituals with a kind of quiet efficiency. No one announces it, but everyone seems to know exactly what comes next. Boots come off. Not gracefully, never gracefully, but with a collective groan of relief that ripples through the group. Leather creaks, laces are tugged loose, and one man beside you exhales as if he's just been released from a long and mildly personal argument with his footwear. You follow suit. Your boots, now that you've noticed them, feel suspiciously heavy. You pull them off with a bit more effort than expected, and the moment they leave your feet, a wave of something hits the air. It's not exactly pleasant. It's not entirely unexpected either. Let's just say the goldfields are not known for their foot care standards. A mainstream historical fact. Most miners worked long hours standing in water, mud, or dry dust, often leading to blisters, infections, and a condition known as goldfield's foot, where poor hygiene and constant moisture caused serious discomfort. In other words, your feet have been through something today, and they would like to file a formal complaint. You glance down. Your socks, if they can still be called that, have seen better centuries. You peel one off carefully, and there it is. A blister, proud and unmistakable, sitting on your heel like it pays rent. Well, you think, that's new. Next to you, a man is already tending to his own collection of foot-related grievances. He pours a small amount of water from a battered tin, rinsing away the day's dust with practiced motions. It's not luxurious. It's not even particularly thorough, but it's enough. You mimic him. The water is cold. Surprisingly cold. It shocks your skin awake, and for a brief moment you consider that this might actually be refreshing. That thought lasts exactly 3 seconds before your brain remembers that comfort is not part of tonight's program. Still, it helps. Another miner reaches into a small pouch and pulls out what looks like a strip of cloth. He wraps it carefully around his toes, securing it with a knot that suggests long experience. No fuss, no implant, just quiet maintenance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners used whatever they had on hand, cloth scraps, animal fat, even chewed leaves, to treat blisters and sore feet. It wasn't medical science so much as creative survival. If it worked once, it became a tradition. You consider your own options. You have less of a system, but you manage something resembling a wrap, tying it in place with mild optimism and a silent agreement not to inspect it too closely later. The fire crackles steadily, casting long shadows that sway with every movement. Someone adds another piece of wood, carefully positioning it as if this small act holds great importance. In a way, it does. Fire is everything out here: warmth, light, a place to gather, and occasionally a very effective way to burn dinner. A man across from you leans back, stretching his legs toward the flames. His feet, now free from boots, look like they've walked across several questionable life choices. He wiggles his toes slightly, then sighs. "Worth it," he mutters. No one asks what exactly he means. Maybe the hope of gold. Maybe the promise of something better. Maybe just the satisfaction of surviving another day without being dramatically inconvenienced by nature. Historians still argue whether most miners truly believed they would strike it rich, or if many simply stayed because they had no better option. Sitting here, watching these small rituals of care and endurance, you get the sense that belief isn't always necessary. Sometimes, continuing is enough. You flex your own toes experimentally. They respond cautiously. Nearby, a conversation drifts your way. Two men are discussing a claim further up the creek. Something about the soil changing color, about flecks of gold appearing just often enough to be encouraging but not enough to be useful. It's the kind of conversation that lives permanently on the edge of optimism. You notice how they talk, carefully, not quite secretive but not entirely open either. Information is shared in layers, each detail offered like a small test of trust. Out here, knowledge can be as valuable as gold, and sometimes easier to carry. A breeze moves through the camp, carrying with it the scent of eucalyptus. It's sharp, clean, and oddly calming. The trees stand just beyond the edge of the lantern light, their pale trunks ghostly in the dark. You hear leaves rustle softly, a sound that feels distant and close at the same time. You pull your coat tighter again. Someone laughs. A low, tired laugh that seems to come from deep in the chest. It's followed by a brief silence. Then another voice adds a comment you don't quite catch, and the laughter spreads, gentle and unhurried. It's not loud humor, not the kind that demands attention, just small, shared moments of relief. You shift slightly, testing your makeshift foot wrap. It holds. Barely, but it holds. You decide that counts as success. One of the older miners, his beard catching the lantern light in soft highlights, leans forward and pokes at the fire with a stick. He doesn't say much, but when he does, people listen. There's a quiet authority in the way he moves, the kind that comes from having seen enough to stop being surprised. "Keep your feet dry tomorrow," he says, almost casually. You nod, even though you're not entirely sure how that's supposed to happen when the entire job involves standing in water or mud. Still, advice is advice. And out here, you take what you can get. You glance down at your boots, now resting beside you. They look innocent, as if they had nothing to do with the events of the day. You briefly consider holding them accountable, but decide against it. It's been a long evening already. Instead, you lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The fire, the voices, the quiet rhythm of people tending to themselves. It all blends into something steady, something almost soothing. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar in a way that doesn't require explanation. You're starting to understand this place. Not in a grand, dramatic sense, but in the small details. The way boots come off at dusk. The way blisters are treated without complaint. The way people sit close to the fire, not just for warmth, but for the simple reassurance that they're not alone in this. And as you sit there, feet cooling in the night air, listening to the soft murmur of the camp, you realize that survival here isn't just about finding gold. It's about making it to evening, and knowing what to do when you get there. The conversation drifts as easily as the smoke rising from the fire, curling upward into the cool night air before dissolving into nothing. Your feet, now loosely wrapped and quietly negotiating their recovery, rest near the warmth, and in your hands, that dented tin mug makes a reappearance. refilled, thankfully. Tea, it turns out, is less of a drink and more of a lifestyle out here. Someone lifts the billiken again, checking it with the seriousness of a master chef inspecting a delicate sauce. There's no recipe, of course, just water, loose tea leaves, and a sort of confident guesswork that borders on tradition. A mainstream historical fact, billy tea became a staple of Australian bush life during the gold rush era, not only because tea was widely available, but because it was easy to prepare over an open fire. It provided warmth, mild stimulation, and a sense of routine, three things that were otherwise in short supply. You watch closely this time. The man doesn't just pour. He pauses, gives the billiken a small swirl, then tips it carefully so the liquid flows while the leaves, hopefully, stay behind. It's a technique that suggests years of practice and at least a few unfortunate spills. You accept another mug. It's just as strong as before, possibly stronger. You suspect the tea leaves have now achieved a level of intensity that could be considered a personality trait. You take a sip anyway. Yes, still aggressive. Around you, the conversations deepen, not louder, just more detailed. The kind of talk that happens when the day is over and there's no need to rush anywhere. A man across the fire leans forward, elbows on knees, telling a story about a claim he once had near Indigo. He describes the soil, the way it shifted from red to a pale yellow, the small glittering flecks that appeared just often enough to keep him digging for weeks. You notice how everyone listens. Not because the story is extraordinary, it isn't, but because it's familiar. Everyone here has a version of that story. The almost success, the near miss, the gold that was just about to change everything. Until it didn't. There's a quiet rhythm to it. He pauses occasionally, taking a sip of tea, letting the fire fill the silence. No one interrupts. There's an unspoken understanding that stories, like tea, should be taken slowly. You glance to your right, where two younger miners are speaking in low tones. Their accents are different, Irish, you think. One of them gestures with his hands as he talks, describing something that sounds like home. Fields, maybe, or rain. There's a softness in his voice that wasn't there earlier. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Australian gold rush attracted people from all over the world: Britain, Ireland, China, Germany, and beyond. On some goldfields, it was possible to hear half a dozen languages in a single evening, all blending into a kind of accidental harmony. You listen. It's not just the words. It's the cadence, the rise and fall of voices shaped by distant places. Even when you don't understand every detail, you understand the feeling behind them. Someone laughs softly at the end of a sentence. Another nods. The fire crackles in agreement. You shift slightly, settling into a more comfortable position, which is to say, a position that is marginally less uncomfortable than before. Your back protests briefly, then gives up, deciding it's not worth the effort. Across from you, the older miner from earlier takes a slow sip of tea, then sets his mug down with deliberate care. "Too many talk," he says quietly, not unkindly. There's a pause, then a few amused glances. He isn't wrong, but talking is part of the evening. It fills the space left by the absence of digging, the absence of noise, the absence of constant effort. It's how people remind themselves that they are more than just hands moving dirt from one place to another. Historians still argue whether these nightly conversations helped build lasting communities or simply provided temporary comfort in an otherwise transient life. Many miners moved frequently, chasing new strikes, new rumors, new chances. And yet, in moments like this, it feels almost permanent. You take another sip of tea. It hasn't improved, but you've adjusted. That's something. A man near the edge of the light begins describing a peculiar method he once saw for finding gold. Something involving observing the way certain plants grew along creek beds. He speaks with quiet conviction, as if the land itself leaves clues for those willing to notice. You're not entirely sure it's accurate, but no one dismisses it outright. Out here, ideas are treated with a kind of cautious respect. Even the strange ones, especially the strange ones, because every now and then, something unusual turns out to be useful. You find yourself drawn into the rhythm of it all. The passing of mugs, the slow exchange of stories, the way people lean in slightly when someone speaks, then lean back again when the moment passes. It's subtle, almost like a shared breathing pattern. The lantern beside you flickers gently, its light shifting across faces and hands. For a moment, it dims, and you wonder if it might go out entirely. But then it steadies again, as if reconsidering. You glance up. The sky is darker now, the first stars beginning to appear. Faint at first, then sharper as your eyes adjust. They hang above the camp in quiet indifference, ancient and patient. Down here, though, things feel smaller, contained, understandable. Someone offers you a piece of something, bread, maybe, rough, slightly uneven. You take it, nodding your thanks. It's not much, but it pairs well with the tea, if only because it gives your mouth something else to think about. You chew slowly. Nearby, the Irish miners have fallen into a soft, half-sung conversation. Not quite a song, not quite speech, just something in between. It drifts through the camp, gentle and unassuming. You realize then that this is what evenings are for. Not just rest, but connection. However brief, however fragile. Because tomorrow everything starts again. The digging, the searching, the hoping. But tonight, for this quiet stretch of time, there is tea and conversation, and the soft glow of lantern light holding back the dark just enough to make the world feel manageable. And as you sit there, listening, sipping, and slowly becoming part of the rhythm, you understand something simple and steady. Out here, stories are a kind of currency, and everyone, in their own way, is trying to stay just a little bit rich. The tea settles warmly in your stomach as the night deepens, and without quite noticing when it happens, the conversations begin to thin. Not abruptly. Nothing out here happens abruptly unless it's inconvenient, but gradually, like a tide easing back. Voices lower, pauses stretch longer, and one by one, people drift toward their tents or simply settle where they are. You remain by the fire for a moment, watching the lantern light ripple across the canvas shelters nearby. They move gently in the breeze, not enough to flap loudly, just enough to whisper. A soft, papery sound that blends with the rustle of eucalyptus leaves overhead. It's the kind of sound that doesn't demand your attention, but once you notice it, it becomes part of everything. You stand, brushing dust from your trousers in a gesture that achieves very little but feels necessary. Your boots wait patiently beside you, but you decide to delay that reunion just a little longer. Your feet, for once, seem grateful. You take a few slow steps away from the fire. The warmth fades quickly, just a few paces, and the air feels noticeably cooler, slipping easily through the gaps in your clothing. You pull your coat tighter again. This has become something of a habit, and glance toward the darker edges of the camp. The lanterns don't reach very far. Beyond them, the bush begins almost immediately. Tall eucalyptus trees stand like pale sentinels, their trunks catching just enough light to appear and disappear as you shift your gaze. Their scent lingers in the air, sharp, clean, and faintly medicinal. A mainstream historical fact, eucalyptus trees were a defining feature of many Australian goldfields, and their oil-rich leaves contributed not only to the distinctive smell of the landscape but also to the frequent risk of bushfires, especially in dry seasons. Tonight, though, the air feels calm. Still, you pause near your tent or what passes for one. Up close, it's even less impressive than it looked from the fire. The canvas is patched in places, stretched over a simple frame that leans ever so slightly to one side. It's the kind of structure that inspires confidence only if you avoid looking at it too closely. You lift the flap and peer inside. Dark mostly. A faint outline of your belongings, rolled blanket, small pack, a few scattered items that you're fairly sure were more organized earlier. You consider stepping in, then hesitate. The night itself is interesting. You step back out again, turning your attention to the sounds. First, it seems quiet, but as you stand still, more becomes apparent. The soft chirp of insects, the occasional distant call of something you can't quite identify and aren't entirely sure you want to, the gentle creak of trees shifting slightly in the breeze, and underneath it all, the low, steady presence of the camp. Someone coughs in the distance, a murmur of voices from another fire, the faint clink of metal as something is set down. It's not silence. It's a layered kind of quiet, built from small, steady sounds that reassure more than they disturb. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many miners developed a kind of familiarity with the nighttime sounds of the bush, learning to distinguish between harmless noises and those worth paying attention to. A rustle might be wind, or it might be something with more legs than you'd prefer. The trick was not overreacting, or at least not overreacting too loudly. You shift your weight slightly, listening. There's a rustle nearby. You freeze. It happens again. A soft movement in the underbrush just beyond the reach of the nearest lantern. Your mind, being wonderfully helpful, immediately begins suggesting possibilities. Most of them unhelpful. You lean forward, squinting into the dark. Pause. Then, something small darts across the ground, just briefly catching the light before disappearing again. Probably nothing. Almost certainly nothing. You straighten, nodding to yourself as if you've successfully handled the situation. Which, to be fair, you have. By doing absolutely nothing. A light joke forms quietly in your mind. You've come all this way in search of gold, and your greatest achievement so far is not being startled by a moderately sized rustle. Progress. You glance back toward the fire. The smaller now, the flames lower, the glow softer. A few figures still sit nearby, their outlines relaxed, movements slow. One of them leans back, stretching, then settles again with a sigh that carries clearly through the cool air. You feel it too, that pull toward rest. But first, you take a moment to simply stand there, breathing in the night. The eucalyptus scent is stronger away from the smoke. The air feels cleaner, sharper. You inhale deeply, then let it out slowly, watching as a faint hint of your breath becomes visible in the lantern light. It's colder than you expected. Historians still argue whether the Australian goldfields were perceived as harsher at night than during the day, or if the contrast simply made the discomfort more noticeable. In the daylight, there's activity, distraction, purpose. At night, there's space. And in that space, every sensation becomes clearer. You step back toward your tent. This time, you duck inside. The canvas shifts behind you, muting the outside world just slightly. Not completely, the sounds still filter through, but enough to create a sense of separation. Your space, however temporary. You lower yourself onto the ground. It's firm, uncompromising. You adjust your position, then adjust again, searching for a configuration that your body will accept without protest. Eventually, you find something acceptable. Your blanket is rough, but it's something. You pull it around your shoulders, feeling the fabric settle into place. It smells faintly of smoke and earth, an aroma that, by now, feels almost familiar. Outside, the camp continues its slow descent into sleep. A voice fades, a final burst of laughter, softer now. The fire crackles once more, then quiets. You lie back, staring up at the faint outline of the tent above you. The canvas shifts gently with the breeze, creating subtle patterns of light and shadow from the lantern outside. It's oddly calming. Not comfortable, not exactly, but steady, predictable. And as you listen to the whisper of canvas, the distant rustle of leaves, and the quiet breathing of a camp settling into rest, you begin to understand how nights like this shape the rhythm of life here. Not through grand events, but through small, repeated moments. A lantern's glow, a tent's soft whisper, and the simple act of being still just long enough to notice them. You lie there for a while, listening to the soft, layered quiet pressing gently against your canvas shelter. The ground beneath you hasn't become any softer, but your body has begun to negotiate terms with it. An uneasy agreement that rest is more important than comfort. Outside, the last murmurs of conversation dissolve into the night, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of the bush and the occasional shift of someone turning over in their own tent. Sleep doesn't come immediately. Instead, your mind drifts. It wanders back over the day, the endless digging, the repetitive motion of pan and shovel, the way the soil changed color just slightly in one patch, enough to catch your attention. You remember the moment you thought you saw something glint, the brief surge of excitement, the careful, almost reverent way you leaned closer. And then, nothing. Just another trick of the light. A mainstream historical fact. Most miners during the Australian gold rush never struck significant wealth. While a few became famously rich, The vast majority earned modest amounts or barely broke even, often spending as much on supplies as they found in gold. The dream was powerful, but reality was usually quieter. You shift slightly under your blanket. That dream, though, it lingers, even now, as you lie here in the dim glow of a fading lantern. It hums quietly in the back of your thoughts. The idea that tomorrow might be different, that the next pan, the next shovel, the next small decision could change everything. It's a strangely persistent hope. Outside, a faint breeze moves through the trees again, and the scent of eucalyptus drifts in through the gaps in the canvas. It mixes with the lingering smell of smoke, creating something oddly soothing. You breathe in slowly, letting it settle. Nearby, someone mutters in their sleep. Another shifts, the sound of fabric brushing against fabric carrying clearly in the stillness. You close your eyes. For a moment, the darkness feels complete. Then shapes begin to form. Not real ones, but the kind your mind creates when it's hovering just on the edge of sleep. Flickers of movement, half-formed images, the memory of gold, perhaps, still catching the light somewhere behind your eyelids. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many miners developed elaborate superstitions about finding gold, believing in lucky days, particular tools, or even specific routines that might improve their chances. Some refused to change habits once they found even the smallest nugget, convinced they had discovered a winning formula. You wonder briefly if you've already done something right without realizing it. Maybe the way you held the pan, maybe the exact spot you stood, maybe the fact that you didn't find anything today is simply part of the process. It's a comforting thought, possibly inaccurate but comforting. You open your eyes again, staring up at the faint outline of the tent roof. The lantern outside flickers once, then steadies, its light shifting slightly as the flame adjusts. Shadows ripple across the canvas like slow-moving water. You listen. The bush has its own rhythm now. The earlier sounds have softened, settled into something more consistent. Insects chirp in steady patterns. Leaves rustle gently. Somewhere in the distance, there's a call, low, unfamiliar, but not alarming. You decide it's probably fine. That seems to be a recurring strategy. Historians still argue whether the psychological pull of gold, the constant possibility of sudden wealth, was more powerful than the actual economic outcomes. For many, the hope itself became a kind of currency, something to carry through long days and longer nights. You feel that now. Not strongly, not overwhelmingly, but present. A quiet thread running through your thoughts, tying today to tomorrow. You turn onto your side, adjusting the blanket again. It resists slightly, then settles. Your foot, still loosely wrapped, gives a small reminder of its existence. You shift it carefully, finding a position that doesn't immediately protest. Better. Outside, a faint glow remains from the fire, now reduced to embers. You can't see it directly, but the light filters through the canvas in a soft, uneven way. It pulses gently, as if the camp itself is breathing. You imagine the others, curled in their own shelters, wrapped in blankets, some asleep, some still awake, staring up at their own canvas ceilings, thinking their own thoughts, each one carrying a version of the same hope, the same uncertainty. It's a shared experience, even in solitude. A small joke drifts through your mind. You've traveled all this way, crossed oceans or continents perhaps, to lie on the ground in a slightly crooked tent, thinking about dirt. Very valuable dirt, to be fair, but still dirt. You almost smile. Almost. The night deepens. The lantern outside dims slightly, then steadies again. You wonder who's tending it, or if it's simply managing on its own now, the flame finding its balance without intervention. Your breathing slows. The sounds of the bush continue, steady and unhurried. They don't demand your attention anymore. They simply exist, a constant backdrop that your mind begins to accept, then gradually ignore. Your thoughts soften. The sharp edges of the day, effort, disappointment, calculation, begin to blur. In their place, something quieter takes hold. Not quite sleep, not quite wakefulness. A space in between. You drift there. The image of the goldfields lingers, but changes. The holes in the ground become less defined, the tools less heavy. The idea of gold itself shifts from something you chase to something that simply exists, somewhere, waiting, or not. It no longer feels urgent, just possible. Your eyes close again, more easily this time. The lantern flickers once more outside, then steadies into a softer glow. The canvas above you whispers gently as the breeze passes through. The ground remains firm, but your body has stopped arguing with it. And as your thoughts slow, stretching out into longer, quieter spaces, you begin to understand another part of life here. Not the digging, not the dreaming, but the waiting, the long, patient stretch between effort and outcome, where nothing happens, and yet everything feels like it might. You don't fully fall asleep, not yet. Instead, you hover in that slow, thoughtful space where your body rests but your mind continues to drift, picking up small threads and turning them over gently. The quiet has settled deeper now, wrapping itself around the camp like an extra layer of canvas. Even the insects seem more measured, their rhythm steady enough to fade into the background of your thoughts. After a while, you shift again. Not because you want to, but because your body reminds you that lying still on uneven ground is a temporary arrangement at best. Your shoulder protests, your hip negotiates, your foot, still wrapped in your earlier attempt at care, makes a quiet but firm suggestion that perhaps more attention is required. You sigh softly. Sleep can wait. You push yourself up slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance you've achieved so far. The blanket slips from your shoulders, and the cool air returns immediately, as if it's been patiently waiting for its chance. You reach for your boots, then pause. No, not yet. Instead, you pull your small pack closer and rummage through it with slow, deliberate movements. The contents are modest, practical things, worn things, but among them you find what you're looking for. A needle, a bit of thread, and a strip of leather that used to be part of something else. Boot repair. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly satisfying. But out here, it's essential. A mainstream historical fact. Miners on the goldfields often had to maintain their own equipment, including boots, tools, and clothing. Supplies were expensive and not always readily available, so basic repair skills were not just useful, they were necessary for survival. You pull one boot closer, turning it in your hands. In the dim light filtering through the canvas, you can see the wear clearly now. The sole has begun to separate slightly at the edge, and the stitching, if it can still be called that, looks more like a suggestion than a structure. You nod to yourself. Yes, this will need attention. You thread the needle slowly, squinting slightly as you guide it through. Takes a couple of tries. Your fingers are not as nimble as they might be in better conditions, or with better lighting, but eventually the thread cooperates. You begin. The motion is simple. In-out pull. In-out pull. Each stitch is small, deliberate, and just a little uneven. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming for holds together when walking, which is a much more achievable goal. Outside, the camp remains quiet. Someone shifts in their sleep. A faint cough, then stillness again. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners became surprisingly skilled at makeshift repairs, developing techniques that would never appear in any formal manual but worked well enough to keep them going. A boot might be patched with leather, cloth, or even pieces of old tools, whatever was available and vaguely durable. You glance at your work. It's a functional, not elegant, not something you'd proudly display, but it's holding. And in this context, that's more than enough. You continue stitching. The rhythm becomes almost meditative. Each movement slows your thoughts, drawing your focus into the small, immediate task. There's no need to think about tomorrow or gold or anything beyond the next stitch. In pull. The thread tightens, the leather shifts slightly, and the gap begins to close. You adjust your grip, leaning a little closer to see better. The light outside flickers faintly, casting shifting shadows across your hands. It's not ideal, but it's workable. Historians still argue whether the daily routines of maintenance, like mending boots or repairing tools, helped miners cope with the uncertainty of gold-seeking life. These small, practical tasks provided a sense of control, a way to make progress even when the ground refused to cooperate. You feel that now. There's something reassuring about fixing something tangible, something immediate. The boot is either repaired or it isn't. There's no ambiguity, no false hope, just a clear result. You finish a line of stitching and pause, flexing your fingers slightly. They're stiff, a little sore, but steady. You turn the boot over, inspecting your work. It holds. You give it a small, testing tug. The seam stays in place. You nod again, satisfied in a quiet, understated way. One boot down. You consider the other. It looks slightly better. Not good exactly, but less urgent. You debate whether to leave it for another time, then decide against it. If you've already started, you might as well continue. Tomorrow will come quickly, and the ground will not be any kinder. You repeat the process. Zet, stitch, pull. The second boot goes faster. Your hands have found the rhythm now, and the movements feel more natural. Not effortless, but familiar. Outside, the night continues its slow, steady presence. The lantern's glow has dimmed further, now a soft, distant light. The sounds of the bush remain constant, but quieter somehow, as if even they are settling into rest. You finish the final stitch and tie off the thread, securing it with a small knot that you hope will hold. You sit back slightly, boots in front of you, and take a moment to appreciate the result. They're still worn, still imperfect, but ready. A small joke crosses your mind. You may not find gold tomorrow, but at least your boots will be prepared for the disappointment. You set them aside carefully. Your hands rest in your lap for a moment, the stillness returning. The act of mending has done more than fix your boots. It's slowed everything down. Your thoughts, your breathing, your sense of time. You feel it now, that quiet readiness for sleep. Not forced, not rushed, just arriving. You pull the blanket back around your shoulders, settling down once more onto the firm ground. This time, your body seems more willing to cooperate, as if it recognizes that the day is truly over. Outside, the last flicker of lantern light steadies into a soft, constant glow. The camp sleeps, and now, finally, you begin to follow. You settle back down slowly, your freshly mended boots resting nearby like quiet companions who have, at least for now, agreed to behave themselves. The blanket wraps around you again, and this time it feels slightly warmer, as if your small act of repair has somehow improved everything by association. Outside, the night holds steady, but something begins to shift. Not in the darkness, not in the air, but in the subtle reawakening of activity near the fire. You hear it first as a faint movement, then the unmistakable sound of someone gently rearranging embers. You open your eyes again. Sleep, it seems, is still negotiating. You sit up just slightly, enough to listen more clearly. A few voices return. Not loud, not urgent, but present. The kind of low conversation that belongs to people who aren't quite ready to sleep, or perhaps have woken briefly and decided that a little warmth might help. And then, a smell reaches you. It's faint at first, then unmistakable. Food. You pause, considering this development. Your stomach, which had been quietly minding its own business, suddenly becomes very interested. You shift the blanket aside and rise again, this time with a bit more purpose. The ground greets you with the same firm indifference as before, but you've grown used to it. You slip your boots back on, carefully, testing your repairs, and step out into the night once more. The air is cool, but the firelight ahead offers a gentle invitation. You walk toward it. A few miners are gathered there again, their silhouettes outlined by the low flames. One of them is crouched near the fire, turning something over on a flat piece of metal, improvised cookware at its finest. Couldn't sleep, someone mutters as you approach. You nod. That seems to be the general theme. You settle near the edge of the group, the warmth returning gradually. The smell grows stronger now. Simple, hearty, and unmistakably comforting. Damper. A mainstream historical fact. Damper was a staple food for many people in the Australian bush, including miners. It's a basic bread made from flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt, cooked directly in the coals or on a simple surface over a fire. It required few ingredients and minimal equipment, making it ideal for life on the goldfields. You watch as the man tending it carefully lifts the bread, tapping it lightly. A hollow sound. He nods, satisfied. Nearly done. There's a quiet anticipation in the group. Not excitement, exactly, but a shared awareness that something warm and filling is about to be divided among them. Next to the damper, another small pot simmers gently. The contents are less clear, but the smell suggests salt meat. Preserved, practical, and not particularly subtle in flavor. Here's a quirky tidbit. Salt meat was a common part of Goldfield's diets, often beef or pork preserved heavily with salt to prevent spoilage. It could last for long periods, but it required soaking or boiling to make it even remotely pleasant to eat. Even then, pleasant might be considered an optimistic description. You sit quietly, watching. There's no rush. No one hovers impatiently. The process unfolds at its own pace, guided by experience rather than urgency. The damper is finally lifted from the heat and set aside to cool slightly. The man handling it tears off a piece, testing the texture, then nods again. Good enough. That seems to be the standard for most things here. He begins to break it apart, handing pieces around. There's no strict order, no formal distribution, just a quiet understanding that everyone will get something. When a piece reaches you, you take it with a small nod of thanks. It's warm, rough, slightly uneven. You take a bite. Simple, very simple, but after a long day and an even longer evening, it feels satisfying in a way that's hard to explain. The warmth, the texture, the act of eating something freshly made. It all adds up to something more than the ingredients themselves. The pot of salt meat is shared next. A small portion is offered. You accept it, noting the way the others handle it with a kind of resigned familiarity. You take a bite. It's salty, very salty. Your expression remains admirably neutral. A small joke forms quietly in your mind. If gold doesn't work out, you could always open a business selling salt. Clearly, there's no shortage of it here. Around the fire, the conversation resumes in soft fragments. Someone mentions a better recipe for damper, something involving a bit of sugar, maybe even milk, if one is feeling particularly extravagant. Another counters that simplicity is the point. There's a brief, gentle debate, then a shared shrug. Food, like everything else here, is practical first. Flavor is optional. Historians still argue whether the diet on the goldfields significantly impacted miners' health in the long term. Limited variety, preserved foods, and inconsistent nutrition likely took their toll, but the full extent remains a topic of discussion. Sitting here, chewing slowly, you get the sense that survival, not optimization, is the priority. You take another bite. The damper softens slightly as it cools, becoming easier to chew. The salt meat remains determinately itself. Still, it fills the space. The fire crackles softly, and someone adds another small piece of wood. The flames respond with a brief flare, then settle again into a steady glow. You glance around. The group is smaller now, more subdued. No one speaks loudly. No one rushes. The act of eating, like the earlier tea, becomes its own quiet ritual. A man across from you leans back slightly, chewing thoughtfully. Better than nothing, he says. There's a murmur of agreement. It's not a complaint, just a statement. You finish your portion slowly, brushing crumbs from your hands. The warmth of the food lingers, adding to the gentle comfort of the fire. For a moment, no one speaks. The silence isn't empty. It's full of small, shared understanding, of effort, of acceptance. You lean back slightly, feeling the ground beneath you, the warmth beside you, the cool air just beyond. This too is part of it. Not the search for gold, but the simple act of sitting together, sharing what little there is, and finding in that moment that it's enough. At least for tonight. The last crumbs of damper disappear, brushed from hands or quietly claimed by the fire, and the small gathering settles into a softer stillness. No one seems eager to move just yet. The warmth holds you all in place, a quiet agreement that this moment, simple, shared, and undemanding, is worth stretching just a little longer. Someone shifts beside you, adjusting their seat with a low sigh. Then, without any clear beginning, the stories return. Not the earlier kind, about claims and soil and near misses, but something deeper, something older. A man across the fire, his face half-lit by the glow, begins speaking in a low, steady voice. His accent carries a lilt you recognize now, Irish, soft and rhythmic. He speaks of a place far from here, of green hills and damp mornings, of a stone wall that ran along the edge of a field his family once worked. You can almost see it as he describes it. The contrast is striking. Here, the earth is dry, stubborn, and pale under the lantern light. There, in his words, it is rich and dark, softened by rain and time. The memory hangs in the air, as vivid as the fire before you. Others listen quietly. No one interrupts. When he finishes, there's a pause, not empty, but respectful. Then another voice picks up, this one sharper, quicker, English perhaps. He talks of narrow streets, of crowded markets, of the constant hum of a city that never quite rested. The stories shift again. A German miner describes forests, dense, ordered, familiar. Another speaks of a long journey by sea, weeks of nothing but water and sky. The details vary, but the feeling remains the same, distance. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Australian gold rush, Chinese miners formed one of the largest non-European groups on the goldfields. Many traveled in organized groups, bringing with them distinct cultural practices, food traditions, and methods of mining that often differed from European approaches. You notice them now, just beyond the immediate circle of firelight. A small group sits together, speaking quietly in a language you don't understand. Their tones are calm, measured. One of them gestures with a pair of chopsticks, emphasizing a point. There's a rhythm to their conversation, a familiarity that feels grounded and steady. One of the men near you glances in their direction, then looks back at the fire. There's no hostility in the moment, just distance. Different stories, different paths that have somehow led to the same place. A mainstream historical fact. Despite moments of cooperation, tensions did exist between different cultural groups on the goldfields, particularly between European and Chinese miners. These tensions sometimes led to conflict, though many also found ways to coexist and even learn from one another. You sit quietly, listening as the stories continue to unfold. They move from place to place, voice to voice, like a slow current. No one tries to dominate the conversation. It flows naturally, guided by memory and the simple desire to be heard. You find yourself imagining each place as it's described. The green hills, the crowded streets, the long, empty ocean. Each one feels distant, almost unreal compared to the dry ground beneath you. And yet, for the people speaking, those places are as real as the fire in front of them. Perhaps even more so. Historians still argue whether the goldfields acted more as a melting pot or a patchwork of separate communities. Some accounts suggest deep cultural exchange, while others point to persistent divisions. Sitting here, you sense both at once, a shared space but not a shared story. You shift slightly, pulling your coat closer. The night has cooled further, and the warmth of the fire feels more valuable now. You extend your hands toward it, feeling the heat settle into your fingers once again. A new voice begins. This one is quieter, more hesitant. The speaker is younger, his words slower as if he's choosing them carefully. He talks about leaving home, about the decision, the uncertainty, the way everything familiar became distant in a matter of weeks. There's a pause in his voice. Then he continues, about arriving here, about the first sight of the goldfields, about the realization that the stories he had heard didn't quite match the reality. A few nods around the fire. That, at least, is a shared experience. You feel it too, in a way. Even without a specific place to remember, you understand the shape of it, the difference between expectation and reality, between hope and what actually unfolds. A small joke drifts through your thoughts. It's almost impressive how far people will travel for the chance to dig holes in increasingly creative ways. You keep that to yourself. The stories continue, but they soften again, becoming less detailed, more fragmented. Words trail off. Sentences remain unfinished. The rhythm slows. Fatigue returns. One by one, people begin to rise. No announcements, no goodbyes, just quiet movements. Standing, stretching, stepping away from the fire and back toward the shadows of their tents. You remain a moment longer. The fire has burned lower now, the flames reduced to a steady glow. The lantern light flickers gently, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the ground. The group has thinned. Only a few remain, sitting in comfortable silence. You glance once more toward the distant shapes of the other camps, where faint lights still glow. Each one holds its own stories, its own voices, its own quiet version of this same moment. Then you stand. Your boots feel slightly better, your repairs holding, at least for now. You take a slow step, then another, testing the ground, the balance, the quiet strength of your work. It's enough. You turn back toward your tent, the sounds of the fire fading behind you. And as you walk through the cool night air, past the whispering canvas and the steady presence of the trees, you carry with you the echoes of those stories. Not your own, but shared just long enough to feel like they might be. You step back into your tent, letting the flap fall gently behind you, and the sounds of the fire soften once more into the background. The night feels deeper now, as if it has settled fully into itself. The small warmth from the shared meal lingers, and for the first time, your body seems more willing to give in to rest. You lower yourself down again, more carefully this time, your movements slower, quieter. The ground hasn't changed, but you have. Feels slightly more familiar now. Less like an obstacle, more like something to work around. You adjust your position, tuck the blanket close, and exhale slowly as your body begins its now-practiced negotiation with stillness. Outside, something shifts. A voice, soft, low, and measured. You pause, listening. It's not conversation, not quite. More like reading. The rhythm is different, steadier, with small pauses that suggest careful attention to words rather than spontaneous thought. You ease yourself up slightly, curiosity winning over comfort once again, and lean closer to the tent opening. The lantern near the fire has been adjusted, its glow steadier now, casting a small circle of light. Within it, a man sits on a crate, holding a piece of paper carefully between his hands. A letter, a mainstream historical fact. During the gold rush era, letters were one of the primary means of communication between miners and their families. However, due to the remote locations of many goldfields, mail delivery could be slow and irregular, sometimes taking weeks or even months to arrive. You watch quietly. The man reads silently for a moment, his eyes moving slowly across the page. Then, almost without realizing it, he begins to speak the words aloud. His voice is soft, deliberate, as if saying the words makes them more real. You can't hear every detail, but fragments reach you. Mentions of home, of weather, of small, ordinary events that feel distant and important at the same time. The garden's doing well. Your brother sends his regards. We hope you are keeping safe. The words hang in the air, fragile and steady. No one interrupts. A few others have gathered again, drawn by the quiet gravity of the moment. They don't sit too close, just near enough to listen without intruding. You remain where you are, half inside your tent, half leaning into the night. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners, unable to read or write, would rely on others to help them compose or interpret letters. In these moments, personal messages became shared experiences, with stories and news passing through multiple voices before reaching their intended recipient. The man pauses. His hand tightens slightly on the paper, just for a moment. Then he continues. There's a change in his tone now, subtle but noticeable. Something softer, more careful. The kind of voice people use when reading words that matter more than they expected. You feel it, even without hearing every line. The distance, the connection, the strange way a single sheet of paper can carry so much weight. Historians still argue whether letters from home provided comfort or intensified homesickness among miners. For some, they were a lifeline, a reminder of why they had come here. For others, they were a quiet ache, a reminder of everything they had left behind. You shift slightly, pulling your blanket closer around your shoulders. The night air feels cooler again, or perhaps you're just more aware of it now. The warmth of the fire doesn't reach quite as far, but the sound of the voice carries clearly. The reading continues. More fragments. We heard news of gold being found near your area. Do not overwork yourself. We miss you. The final line lingers. There's a pause. The man lowers the paper slightly, staring at it as if expecting more words to appear. They don't. He folds it carefully, smoothing the edges with a slow, deliberate motion. There's no rush, no sudden movement, just a quiet, controlled end to something that feels larger than the moment itself. No one speaks for a while. The silence is different now. Not empty, not casual, but full. Heavy in a gentle way, like something that doesn't need to be explained. You ease back into your tent, letting the flap fall closed again. Inside, the darkness feels softer, more contained. You lie back down, your head resting against your pack, and stare up at the faint outline of the canvas above you. The words you heard or half heard echo faintly in your thoughts. Garden, brother, safe, miss you. They're simple words, ordinary even, but out here they carry a different weight. A small joke drifts through your mind, quieter this time. It's almost ironic. People travel thousands of miles in search of gold, only to find that the most valuable things are the ones they can't bring with them. You let that thought settle. Outside, the lantern flickers once, then steadies again. The man who read the letter remains by the fire, though you can no longer see him. The others have begun to drift away once more, their footsteps soft against the ground. The camp returns to its slower rhythm. You close your eyes. The images come more easily now, not sharp, not detailed, but present. A garden you've never seen, a house you've never visited, faces you don't know, speaking words meant for someone else. And yet, for a moment they feel close, part of the same quiet world. Your breathing slows again. The ground beneath you remains firm, but your body has accepted it fully now. The blanket holds its warmth. The sounds of the night continue, steady and unchanging. And somewhere beyond the canvas, beyond the lantern light, beyond the reach of the goldfields entirely, life continues in other places. Softer places, greener places, places that exist now only in memory, and in letters read aloud under a quiet, flickering light. You lie still, the echo of those quiet, careful words fading into the steady rhythm of the night. For a moment, everything feels settled again, balanced, even. The camp breathes softly, the bush hums in the background, and your thoughts drift somewhere between memory and sleep. Then, faintly, something shifts. A sound. Not loud, not sudden, just different. You open your eyes. First, it's nothing clear. A distant movement, perhaps. A footstep, or just the soft shifting of someone turning in their sleep. You listen more closely, your senses sharpening just slightly. There it is again. A crunch. Very soft, but deliberate. You don't move right away. Instead, you stay still, letting your ears do the work. The sound comes from beyond your tent, somewhere between the camp and the darker edge of the bush. Another step, then silence. Your mind, ever helpful, begins its quiet speculation. Could be nothing, probably nothing, almost certainly nothing. Still, you find yourself sitting up slowly, careful not to make any sudden noise. The blanket slips from your shoulders, and the cooler air brushes against your skin again, bringing you fully awake. You glance toward the tent opening. The lantern light outside is dimmer now, but still present, enough to cast long, uncertain shadows across the ground. You hesitate for a moment. Then, quietly, you lean forward and lift the edge of the canvas just enough to look out. The camp is mostly still. A few shapes lie motionless near the fire, wrapped in blankets. The embers glow faintly, their light low but steady. The trees stand as they did before, tall, pale, unmoving. Nothing obvious. And yet, you listen again. A mainstream historical fact. Goldfields camps were not only busy during the day but also vulnerable at night. With valuable finds often kept close by, the risk of theft was real, and some miners took turns keeping watch to protect their claims and belongings. You remember that now. The idea of a night watch. You hadn't noticed one earlier, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. A shadow shifts near the edge of the firelight. You focus on it. There, a figure standing slightly apart from the others. Still, upright, watching, not moving much, but present. A watchman. You exhale slowly, tension easing just a little. That explains something. The figure takes a slow step, then another, pacing the edge of the camp with quiet purpose. His movements are deliberate, unhurried, as if he's done this many times before. You lower the canvas slightly, still watching. He pauses near a cluster of supplies, tools perhaps or sacks, and stands there for a moment, listening. Then he moves on again, circling back toward the fire. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners organized informal watch systems, especially in larger camps, to deter theft. Others relied on dogs, though out here, a dog might just as easily wander off or become distracted by something far more interesting than guarding your belongings. You imagine a dog deciding that chasing a rustle in the bushes is more important than protecting your gold. Honestly, that feels accurate. You keep watching. The guard stops again, this time looking out toward the darker stretch beyond the camp. The bush seems still, but you know better now. Stillness doesn't mean absence. It just means quiet. Historians still argue whether the fear of bushrangers, armed bandits who occasionally targeted goldfields, was as widespread as contemporary accounts suggest, or if it became exaggerated over time. Either way, the idea lingers, shaping the way people behave after dark. You glance toward your small pack. There's nothing particularly valuable in it. Nothing worth stealing, certainly, but the instinct remains, the quiet awareness that, out here, you're responsible for what you have. And for yourself. The watchman shifts again, adjusting his stance, then resumes his slow circuit. His presence is reassuring in a subtle way. Not dramatic, not protective in any grand sense. Just steady, pair of eyes in the dark. You lower the canvas flap and sit back slightly, letting it fall into place. Inside the tent, the darkness feels a little different now. Not threatening, but more defined. You're aware of the space, of its boundaries, of the thin layer separating you from the wider world outside. You lie back down slowly. The ground greets you again with its familiar firmness. You adjust your position, pulling the blanket closer, letting it settle around you. Your ears remain alert for a moment longer. Another faint sound. But this time, it's easier to place. Someone shifting, a quiet cough, the soft rustle of fabric. Ordinary things, expected things. Your breathing begins to slow again. The brief alertness fades, replaced by something softer, safer. A small joke drifts through your thoughts. You've successfully survived your first night watch experience without actually doing any watching. Truly a remarkable achievement. You almost smile. Almost. Outside, the watchman continues his quiet path, his footsteps barely audible now. The embers glow faintly, their light steady but subdued. The bush remains what it always is, present, patient, and just beyond full understanding. Inside, you settle. The earlier tension dissolves, leaving behind a gentle awareness rather than concern. You've seen the watch. You've heard the sounds. Nothing has changed, but everything feels slightly more known. And that somehow makes it easier. Your eyes close again. This time, sleep feels closer. The thoughts that once wandered now drift more slowly, their edges softening. The images fade more quickly. The sounds of the night blend into a single, steady background. The camp holds. The watch continues. And you, wrapped in your blanket beneath the whispering canvas, begin to slip quietly into rest once more. Your breathing settles again, slower now, more even. As the brief alertness fades into the background, the quiet presence of the watchman, pacing somewhere beyond your tent, becomes just another part of the night's rhythm. Steady, predictable, almost comforting in its repetition. You don't fully sleep yet. Instead, your mind drifts back toward the edges of the camp, toward the subtle tensions that linger beneath the calm. Not sharp or immediate, but present in the way people speak, in the way they share space, in the careful balance between cooperation and competition. You heard it earlier in fragments, in the pauses between stories, in the way certain details were offered and others withheld. You open your eyes again, not because something has disturbed you, but because the thought itself has. The goldfields are quiet now, but they are not simple. A mainstream historical fact: disputes over mining claims were common during the gold rush. With limited regulation in the early years, miners often had to negotiate boundaries and rights among themselves, leading to informal systems of rules and occasional conflict when those rules were tested. You shift slightly, propping yourself up just enough to listen. First, there's nothing unusual. Then, faintly, voices. Not far. Low. Measured. You lean toward the tent opening again, lifting the canvas just enough to see. Two figures stand near the edge of the camp, just beyond the main circle of firelight. Their outlines are visible, but their faces remain in shadow. They're not shouting, not even close, but there's a tension in the way they stand, still direct, focused on each other. You listen. Wasn't marked properly. Been working that stretch all week. The words drift in fragments, carried just far enough to reach you. A disagreement. Not loud, not escalating, but real. You remain still, watching. One of the men gestures toward the ground, indicating a direction you can't quite see. The other shakes his head slowly, arms crossed. There's a pause, then a quieter exchange, the tone shifting slightly. Less sharp, more deliberate. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many goldfields develop their own informal codes of conduct, often referred to as miners' law, where disputes were settled by group consensus rather than formal authority. These systems could be surprisingly effective, though not always consistent. You wonder if this is one of those moments. The watchman, still making his rounds, approaches the two figures. He doesn't interrupt immediately, just stops nearby, observing. His presence changes the dynamic slightly. The voices lower further. The gestures become smaller. A third voice joins. You hadn't noticed him before. Another miner stepping closer, drawn by the quiet tension. He speaks calmly, asking a question you can't quite hear, but the effect is clear. The conversation shifts again. Less confrontation, more explanation. Historians still argue whether these informal systems of justice created a sense of fairness or simply reinforced existing inequalities among miners. Without formal oversight, outcomes often depended on who was present and who was willing to speak. You watch as the three men stand together, the earlier tension easing just slightly. One nods, another exhales. The third gestures toward the ground again, but this time the movement is slower, more measured. A resolution, perhaps, or at least a pause. No one raises their voice. No one storms away. Eventually, one of the men turns and walks back toward the tents, his steps steady, unhurried. The second remains for a moment longer, then follows. The third lingers briefly, exchanging a few quiet words with the watchman before also moving on. The camp returns to stillness. You lower the canvas flap again, letting it fall into place. Inside, the darkness feels unchanged, but your understanding of it has shifted slightly. The calm you felt earlier is still there, but now you can see the threads beneath it. The small negotiations, the quiet disagreements, the constant balancing act of people living close together under uncertain conditions. You lie back down slowly. The ground, once again, meets you without compromise. You adjust your position, pulling the blanket closer, letting it settle around you. Your thoughts linger on what you've just seen. Not dramatic, not intense, but important in its own way. A small joke drifts through your mind. Even in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but dirt and determination, people still manage to argue about property lines. Some things, it seems, are truly universal. You let that thought pass. Outside, the watchman resumes his steady circuit. The embers glow faintly. The bush continues its quiet, patient presence. Inside, your breathing slows once more. The tension you sensed fades, replaced by a quieter understanding. Disputes happen. They rise, they settle, they become part of the rhythm, just like everything else here. Nothing is perfectly stable, but nothing is entirely chaotic either. It's a balance, and for now it holds. Your eyes close again. The images come more softly this time. The fire, the figures, the faint outlines of movement in the night. They don't linger long. They drift, fade, dissolve into something less defined. Sleep feels closer now. Not forced, not distant, just approaching. And as your thoughts quiet, settling into longer, gentler spaces, the goldfields around you continue their slow, steady rest, held together by routine, by quiet agreements, and by the simple understanding that tomorrow will come, whether anyone is ready for it or not. Your breathing settles into a slow, steady rhythm, and this time, when you drift, it feels deeper. Not quite sleep yet, but closer than before. The thoughts that once circled now move in softer lines, less urgent, less defined. And then, without fully noticing when it happens, you become aware of something else. Pattern. Not in the sounds, not in the movement, but in the repetition of everything you've experienced tonight. Boots off.
Teaporet.
Food shared. Stories told. Repairs made. Watch kept. Rest attempted. It's all familiar now. You open your eyes just slightly, staring up at the faint outline of the canvas above you. It shifts gently with the breeze, the same quiet whisper you noticed earlier. Nothing has changed, and yet, everything feels more settled. Routine. That's what it is. A mainstream historical fact. Despite the unpredictable nature of gold mining, many miners develop daily routines to bring structure to their lives. Regular times for meals, rest, and maintenance. These patterns helped create a sense of normalcy in an otherwise uncertain environment. You feel that now. The rhythm of the evening has carried you through, step by step, without needing to be explained. Each action followed the last, not because it was planned, but because it made sense. You sit up slightly again. Not fully, just enough to shift your position and ease the pressure on your shoulder. The movement is slow, careful, almost instinctive now. You've learned how to move in this space without disrupting it too much. Outside, the camp remains quiet, but not silent. There's always something. A faint rustle, a distant shift, the steady presence of the night itself. It no longer feels unfamiliar, feels expected. You listen. The watchman's steps, now a distant pattern. The occasional murmur from someone half asleep. The soft crackle of embers, still holding on. It's all part of the same quiet system. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners became so accustomed to the rhythms of camp life that they could wake at nearly the same time each day without any external signal, guided only by habit and the subtle cues of their environment, light, temperature, sound. You wonder if that will happen to you. If after enough nights like this, your body will simply know when to wake, when to rest, when to move. You shift again, settling back down. The blanket pulls close around you, holding what warmth it can. Your boots, now repaired, sit quietly nearby. Your pack rests where you left it. Everything has its place. Not perfectly arranged, but consistently enough. Historians still argue whether these routines were consciously developed or simply emerged over time as a natural response to the conditions of Goldfield's life. Either way, they became a defining part of the experience. You feel it in your body now, a kind of quiet alignment. The earlier restlessness has faded. The urge to move, to check, to listen for every small sound. It's softened. In its place is something steadier. Acceptance, perhaps. You close your eyes again. This time, the darkness feels different. Not empty, not uncertain, just there. Your thoughts move more slowly now, stretching out into longer spaces. The images that come, firelight, canvas, the faint outline of trees, are softer, less detailed. They don't demand your attention. They simply pass through. A small joke drifts by, barely forming. You've spent the entire evening doing very little, and somehow it feels like you've accomplished everything. You let it go. Outside, the camp continues its quiet rest. The watchman's steps grow more distant, or perhaps less noticeable. The embers dim further, their glow now a faint suggestion rather than a steady light. The bush remains, always present, always just beyond. You take a slow breath in, then out. Your body settles deeper into the ground, no longer resisting it. The firmness that once felt intrusive now feels stable, dependable. It holds you without question. The blanket shifts slightly as you adjust, then stills. Everything stills. And in that stillness, you begin to understand something simple. Out here, in a place defined by uncertainty, by constant effort, by the unpredictable search for something hidden beneath the earth, routine becomes a kind of anchor. Not dramatic, not obvious, but steady, reliable, a way to move through the day and the night without needing to question every step. You drift closer to sleep now. The sounds fade further. The thoughts slow again. The edges soften. And somewhere in the quiet space between waking and dreaming, the goldfields hold their shape, not as a place of noise or effort, but as a series of small, repeated moments that carry you gently from one part of the night to the next, until, eventually, even those moments begin to fade. Your thoughts thin out like the last wisps of smoke from the fire, stretching and dissolving until they barely hold together. The rhythm of the camp has fully taken over now, and you drift within it, no longer separate from it but part of the same slow, steady pattern. At some point, without quite noticing when, you open your eyes again. Not fully awake, just aware. The darkness has changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. The deep black of earlier has softened into something slightly lighter. A quiet shift that suggests the night is no longer at its deepest point. You lie still, watching the faint outline of your tent ceiling, and realize that time has moved forward while you weren't paying attention. Outside, the camp is quieter than before. Not just in sound, but in presence. The last of the murmurs have faded completely. Even the occasional restless movement has stilled. It feels as though everyone has finally slipped into sleep at once, as if the entire goldfield has agreed to rest together. You listen. The watchman's steps are gone now, or perhaps he's simply moved farther away. Either way, the sense of being watched over has shifted into something more distant, less defined. A mainstream historical fact: without artificial lighting beyond lanterns and fires, people in the 19th century often aligned their sleep patterns more closely with natural light cycles. Many would wake briefly during the night, a phenomenon known as segmented sleep, before drifting back into rest until dawn. You realize that might be what this is. Not a full waking, just a quiet pause, a moment between sleeps. You shift slightly, turning onto your back, your eyes drifting toward the faint opening of your tent. The canvas has loosened just enough to reveal a sliver of sky. And there they are, stars, clear, sharp, endless. You hadn't noticed them properly before. The earlier glow of lanterns and fire had kept your attention low, close to the ground. But now, with the camp nearly dark, the sky reveals itself fully. It stretches above you in a vast, silent expanse. You find yourself staring. There's something deeply calming about it. The scale, the stillness, the quiet certainty that those distant points of light have been there long before this camp, and will remain long after. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many miners relied on the stars for basic orientation, especially when moving between camps or navigating unfamiliar terrain. While not all were skilled navigators, the night sky often served as a simple, reliable guide in an otherwise featureless landscape. You trace a few patterns with your eyes. Not precisely, just loosely connecting points, imagining shapes. You're not entirely sure which constellations you're seeing, but that hardly matters. The act itself is enough. A slow breath in, then out. The air feels cooler now, the kind of chill that settles just before morning begins its slow approach. You pull the blanket closer again, tucking it under your chin. Historians still argue whether the isolation of the goldfields led miners to reflect more deeply on their place in the world, or if the daily demands left little room for such thoughts. But in moments like this, quiet, still, suspended between night and day, it's hard not to feel a sense of perspective. You are very small here, not in an uncomfortable way, just small. The camp, the tents, the fires, all of it seems temporary beneath that wide, unchanging sky. The search for gold, the stories, the routines, they matter, but they also fade into something quieter when placed against that vastness. A small joke drifts through your mind, softer than before. Somewhere out there, beyond all of this, there might be entire worlds, and here you are, carefully mending boots and arguing over dirt. You almost smile again. Almost. A faint sound reaches you, so soft you nearly miss it. Birds. Not many. Just one or two, their calls tentative, as if testing the air. You listen. Another call follows, slightly clearer. Morning isn't here yet, but it's thinking about it. You shift again, settling deeper into your blanket. Your body feels heavier now, more willing to rest. The brief wakefulness has passed, leaving behind a gentle calm rather than restlessness. Your eyes drift back to the stars. They seem brighter now, or perhaps your vision has simply adjusted. Either way, they hold your attention for a moment longer, steady and silent. Then, slowly, your eyelids lower. The image lingers briefly behind them, points of light against a dark expanse, before fading into something softer, less defined. Your breathing slows again. The sounds of the bush return to the background, steady and unchanging. The faint calls of birds continue, spaced far apart, marking the slow approach of something new. But not yet, not fully. You drift again, this time deeper. The thoughts don't return. The images don't linger. There is only the quiet rhythm of breath, the steady presence of the ground, and the soft, distant sense of a world that continues, gently, without needing your attention. And for now, that's enough. Your sleep deepens, but not completely. It never quite does out here. Instead, it moves in gentle waves, drifting down, then rising slightly, then settling again. And somewhere within that slow rhythm, you become aware of a subtle change. Not a sound exactly, not movement, just light. At first, it's barely noticeable. A faint softening of the darkness behind your closed eyes. You don't open them right away. You simply lie there, sensing it the way you might sense warmth before feeling it fully. Morning is approaching. You shift slightly under the blanket, your body responding before your mind fully catches up. The ground is still firm beneath you, but it no longer feels intrusive. It's simply there, as it has been all night, steady and unchanged. Your eyes open slowly. The canvas above you is no longer a deep shadow. It holds a faint gray tone now, uneven but growing clearer. The edges of the fabric, the small creases and folds, they begin to take shape again. Outside, the first real sounds of morning begin. A bird calls, this time more certain. Another answers, then a third. The pattern builds gradually, not all at once, but in layers. Each sound joins the next, forming a quiet chorus that feels both new and familiar. A mainstream historical fact. Miners often began their days early, taking advantage of the cooler morning hours before the heat of the Australian sun became overwhelming. Dawn was not just a transition, it was a signal to begin again. You remain still for a moment longer. There's no rush, not yet. The camp hasn't fully woken. The sounds are still tentative, still forming. A few distant movements. Someone shifting, a soft cough, the creak of canvas as another tent stirs. You take a slow breath in. The air feels different. Cooler, yes, but also fresher. The scent of eucalyptus is lighter now, less mixed with smoke. The fire outside has nearly gone out, its embers reduced to a faint glow that no longer dominates the air. You sit up slowly. Your body responds with a quiet stiffness, a reminder of yesterday's work. Your shoulders protest gently. Your back offers a brief commentary. Your foot, wrapped and rested, feels improved but cautious. You nod to yourself. Acceptable. You reach for your boots, inspecting them in the dim morning light. The stitching you worked on during the night holds. Not perfectly, but well enough. You slip them on, carefully. They fit as they did before, but now there's a subtle difference, a sense of readiness, perhaps. Or maybe just the reassurance that you've done what you can. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners believe that starting the day with certain small rituals, adjusting tools in a specific order, stepping onto the claim with a particular foot first, might improve their chances of finding gold. Whether it worked or not was another matter entirely. You pause briefly, considering. Left foot first? Right foot? You decide not to overthink it. Both seem equally unproven. Outside, the camp continues its slow return to life. You push aside the tent flap and step out into the early morning light. The sky is pale now, a soft gradient stretching from gray to the faintest hint of gold near the horizon. The trees stand as they did before, but now their shapes are clearer, their pale trunks catching the growing light. A few miners are already awake. One stands near the remains of the fire, stirring the embers gently, coaxing them back to life. Another stretches slowly, arms raised, back arching as if trying to realign everything that yesterday misaligned. There's a quiet determination in these movements. No one speaks loudly, no one rushes, but the intention is clear. The day is beginning again. Historians still argue whether the repetitive nature of goldfield life, dig, rest, repeat, created resilience or simply wore people down over time. Perhaps it did both. Watching these early risers, you sense a kind of practiced endurance. Not enthusiasm, not dread, just readiness. You take a few steps forward, feeling the ground beneath your boots. Firm, dry, unchanged. The holes from yesterday remain, scattered across the landscape like unfinished thoughts. Some will be returned to, others will be abandoned. New ones will be started. The pattern continues. A man nearby lifts a billy can, checking its contents before setting it over the rekindled fire. The familiar routine begins again: water, heat, tea. You almost smile. Tea seems inevitable. A small joke drifts through your mind. You may not find gold today, but you will absolutely find more tea. That much is certain. You walk a little farther, stretching your legs, testing the quiet strength of your repaired boots. They hold. Each step feels stable enough. The camp fills slowly. More figures emerge from tents, adjusting coats, rubbing eyes, stepping into the cool morning air. The conversations begin again, soft at first, then gradually building. Nothing dramatic, nothing new, and yet everything feels renewed. You pause, looking out over the goldfields. The light grows stronger, revealing more detail with each passing moment. The earth, the tools, the tents, all of it comes back into focus. Another day, another chance. Not guaranteed, but possible. You take a breath, steady and slow. And without needing to say anything, without needing to plan too far ahead, you step forward into the quiet beginning of it all. You stand there for a moment longer, the pale morning light stretching quietly across the goldfields, touching everything with a kind of gentle certainty. The camp is awake now, not fully alive in the way it will be later, but stirring, gathering itself, preparing. The fire has been coaxed back into a low, steady flame. The billy can hum softly as it heats, promising another round of strong, unapologetic tea. Around you, figures move with slow purpose, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The rhythm has returned. You take a few steps forward, your boots pressing into the ground with a quiet firmness. They hold well enough. Your repairs, though simple, have done their job. There's a small satisfaction in that, a reminder that even the smallest effort can carry forward into the next day. A mainstream historical fact. For many miners, daily life on the goldfields became a cycle of repetition. Digging, washing, resting, punctuated only occasionally by success. It was not the dramatic, fortune-filled adventure many had imagined, but a steady, demanding routine that required patience and persistence. You see that now more clearly than before. The holes in the earth, the tools leaning against makeshift supports, the tents, slightly worn but still standing. Everything speaks of continuity. You walk past a group of miners already gathered near a shallow creek, their pans dipping into the water with practiced motions. The sound is soft, repetitive, the gentle swirl of water and sediment, the careful tilt, the quiet inspection. Hope in motion. Nearby, someone stretches again, rolling their shoulders before picking up a shovel. Another adjusts their hat, glancing briefly at the ground as if trying to read it before the day begins. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some miners believed they could feel where gold might be found, trusting instinct or subtle changes in the land. While modern geology would disagree, these intuitive methods were surprisingly common, blending observation with a touch of hopeful imagination. You pause at the edge of the activity. There's no rush to join in. Not yet. Instead, you take a moment to look back. The camp, now fully visible in the growing light, feels different from when you first arrived. Not because it has changed, but because you have You recognize the patterns now, the routines, the quiet agreements, the way people move, speak, rest. It all fits together in a way that didn't seem obvious before. Historians still argue whether the goldfields should be remembered primarily for their economic impact or for the social communities they created. But standing here, watching the slow unfolding of another day, it's clear that both mattered, intertwined, inseparable. You turn back toward the creek. The water catches the early light, reflecting it in small, shifting patterns. It's not a large stream, not particularly impressive, but it holds the same quiet promise as everything else here. Possibility. You step closer, crouching slightly to watch the movement of the pans. The process is simple, almost meditative: scoop, swirl, tilt, inspect. Over and over again. One of the miners glances up briefly, nods, then returns to his work. No words needed. You could join them. You could pick up a pan, begin the same slow search. But instead, you remain still for a moment longer. Because something about this pause feels important. Not the beginning of the day, not the work, but the space just before it. A small joke drifts through your mind, softer now, almost fading. You've spent an entire night learning how to rest in a place built for effort. That feels oddly impressive. You let it pass. The light grows stronger. The sounds increase. The day continues. And with it, the cycle resumes. Steady, unremarkable, and quietly meaningful. The pace begins to slow now. Not around you, but within you. The movement of the miners, the rhythm of the work, the gentle repetition of actions. It all fades slightly, as if you're stepping back from it, allowing it to continue without needing to follow every detail. Your breath softens. The air feels lighter now, warmer at the edges. You step back from the creek, the sounds of water and motion becoming more distant. The camp remains active and steady, but your focus drifts elsewhere, to the broader shape of the morning, to the way the light spreads evenly across the land. The eucalyptus trees stand quietly, their leaves catching the early sun. The tents rest where they always have. The fire continues its gentle burn. Everything is as it should be. You find a place to sit, just at the edge of the camp, where the ground is still firm but the activity feels slightly removed. You lower yourself carefully, the motion slow and deliberate. There's no need to rush now. No need to think too far ahead. The goldfields will continue, with or without your attention. And that's all right. You rest your hands loosely, letting them settle. Your eyes soften, not fully closing, but no longer searching. The sounds blend together now. The distant voices, the movement of tools, the quiet presence of the bush. None of it stands out. None of it demands anything from you. It simply exists. You take another slow breath. The air moves easily. Your body, once tense and uncertain, feels heavier now, more grounded. The small discomforts, the firm earth, the cool air, the lingering soreness, they no longer feel important. They're just part of the background. Like everything else, your thoughts drift again, but this time they don't form clearly. They pass through, light and unstructured, like the soft movement of clouds across the sky. There's no need to hold onto them, no need to follow them. You simply let them go. The light continues to grow. The camp continues to move, but you remain still, resting in the quiet space between effort and rest, between night and day. And as that stillness deepens, everything begins to soften. The edges blur, the sounds fade, the moment stretches gently, then settles. And you, wrapped in that calm, steady presence, drift just a little further away from the details of the goldfields, into something quieter, something softer, something that asks nothing of you at all.